Okay.
Good evening and welcome to Conversations With. The original intent of Caritas in Veritate was to offer support for Father James Altman, the pastor at St. James the Less Church in La Crosse, Wisconsin, who had been providing homilies and meditations online because his church was closed due to COVID. His approach to the word found in the irrefutable, unchanging, and Catholic dogma, doctrine, and tradition was different than many other of his brother priests and bishops, which got him in trouble. It surprised him that his online family were, in his words, starving for the truth, for which he came under fire. Soon we began to hear about a lot of clergy and laity in the church speak in the same manner and tone, and we agreed that we should support them in their efforts as well by featuring them in the group. To further the so that's how Conversations With was conceived, and this first guest of ours, which we hope is the first of many, is a convert to Catholicism, author, outspoken speaker, David L. Gray. David has been a challenger at the modernist movement in the deep church. Welcome, David.
Thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here on Conversations With this inaugural episode. This is awesome.
Okay, I'm going to start, MJ.
Great.
Okay, David, in your opinion, is Pope Francis misunderstood, or is he willfully steering the church towards modernism?
Oh, you guys are starting off with the real stuff.
We don't fool around, David.
Yeah, this is like the first question. Sometimes people ask me, "Oh, what are you drinking? How's your day?" Now we're just gonna get straight into just straight into Pope Francis. Right? How you doing? Woefully understood, or
is he misunderstood?
I think Pope Francis. I think because he's been around since what 2012. I want to say he's been a Holy Pontiff, and I think when he was first elected, I think we want to give him the benefit of the doubt, right? I think a lot of us want to say, maybe he's being understood, maybe he's being misinterpreted, maybe there's some translation problems between the Italian and the English. I think a lot of us want to give him the benefit of the doubt, but now we're talking about 8-9 years later. I think a lot of people were wrong in the beginning. No, I think he's clearly very Jesuitish, right? He's a South American, very influenced by Marxism and communism and socialism. And I will say this about him, though. I mean, as I've read a lot about his early life, I think he did have an encounter with Jesus Christ. His grandmother was the one that introduced him to Francis of Assisi. And so the problem is this with Pope Francis is that he wants to take his personal experience of how he encountered Christ, and he wants to reshape and reform the church in that image of his understanding of how he understands the world to be, right? He wants to take his worldview and just reshape the church with it. And his problem is that he rejects the papacy, he rejects tradition, and so he wants to take this rejectionism of Catholicism, and he wants to frame the church in that aspect. I back in 2012, I wrote this, and it's still true today, that I think Pope Francis, he operates his papacy through three windows: rejectionism, indifferentism, and there was a third one, I forget what it is, but those were the main three: this rejectionism and this indifferentism. And we keep seeing that over and over and over again. He rejects the tradition, and he's quite indifferent to what I think it really expresses itself that we could price rather than indifferentism. We could really say we see a lot of modernism come out of how he approaches, how he winks at the dogma, and he wants to insert other things and water it down.
Thank you.
David, given that point in this upheaval between the traditionalists and the modernists in our church, how do you see, coming from your perspective, first as an agnostic, and then as a Protestant, and then as a Catholic, how others on the outside of the church view what's going on inside our church today? And do you think that they look at it as just upheaval and the demise of the Catholic Church, or do they think, oh, this is just more of the same?
Yeah, wow, those are two great grand contrasts, upheaval or more of the same. And then I guess we can add a third option. I mean, so we don't have like the logical false dilemma of just two options. We could say that obviously there's some people who would really don't know much about the Catholic Church. And I think that's probably the larger group who don't know what the Catholic Church is, what she believes, and what they're learning about the Catholic Church is what Pope Francis is putting out, and this indifferentism to the dogma that they see coming from the bishops of the Catholic Church and the cardinals, and even a recent thing that we have going on with a president who identifies as Catholic, but rejects core teaching of the Catholic Church. And I think the world is looking at this because, you know, on Google, there's this, I forget the link that you go to, but you can look up what are the most popular search strings from that day. Consistently, since Joe Biden has become president, one of the top search strings every day of the week in the top 10 for the Catholic search strings is Joe Biden a Catholic? So on Google, this is a top 10 search string that people around the world are asking, is Joe Biden a Catholic? That should be concerning, because if Catholics aren't asking that question, who's asking this question? So this is, and so that's I think that goes to MJ's question, like what perception are we putting out? And so I think it's that larger group of people trying to figure out what is the Catholic Church? What do they believe? And how did, and they've heard some things. They heard we're not for abortion. We're not, we're pro-life. We're for marriage between one man and one woman. And they have some understanding who Joe Biden is. And they're struggling with this. Okay, well, he says he's Catholic, but from what I heard, the Catholic Church teaches this. And is Joe Biden a Catholic? And so, yeah, I think that's the larger group that we're dealing with. These people who are just confused, and they're getting no truth and no answers.
Yeah, David,
go ahead.
You've touched on something. I mean, is Joe Biden Catholic? I think we find ourselves asking, is Frankie Catholic? Is Frankie Catholic? It's no longer a joke. It's like, it's actually become a real question.
Yeah.
And I listened to one of your videos the other day, and you touched on the Jesuits as well. Are the Jesuits actually Catholic?
Yeah.
I mean, it's become, these guys have such an influence over everything that we do, over how the church is run, how things are steered. And here we find ourselves in chaos and confusion because nobody seems to be pulling in the reins on them. What is it with that?
Yeah, that interview I did with Patrick Coffin, we had a whole show about that, live stream about that.
Yeah.
Because it's another one of those questions that people are asking, and like, is the Pope Catholic? Like you said, it used to be a joke. Is the Jesuits are Jesuits Catholic? Like, and you hear people say this. People say, oh, never. People who went to a Jesuit university or a Jesuit high school, they don't say I went to a Catholic high school. No, they say, oh, I went to a Jesuit. Even they know there's something a little different here, right? And the Jesuits themselves, I mean, here's a religious order who's recently the head of their order, who they call the Black Pope. You know, he recently said, you know, he didn't believe that Satan was a personal devil. He didn't believe in the person of Satan, that it was just mythological, that it was just a construct, right? And so, I mean, you know, it's one of those things. If you have a Protestant friend, right, and they're looking for a good place to send their child, send them to a Jesuit university, right? Because they'll stay Protestant, right? Or they'll become an atheist. What they're not going to do is become Catholic, right? And that's the sad state. Every university these people run, especially in North America, are some of the worst universities in the country as far as the Catholic culture that you have there. People go there and they don't. By the time they graduate, they're not Catholic. Just some of the most radical, liberal, leftist type of thinking you can leave. I mean, some of the most unorthodox Catholics you can think of are professors at the university. Brian Massengill at Fordham. I mean, the man says he's a gay Catholic priest. I mean, what is that? How can you be? What is that? So, yeah. I mean, what happened to the Jesuits?
Well, the Jesuits have a very, I'm sorry, have a very deep history back to the Civil War, prior to the Civil War. I mean, at Georgetown University, and you know the whole story about that. I mean, they owned slaves, and what did the Pope at that time say? Well, sell your slaves.
Yeah,
you have to get rid of
272 of them. Yeah,
exactly. I mean, they do have, unfortunately, a very checkered past, to say the least. To say the very least, yes. And but it's but we are, for lack of a better expression, stuck with them.
But why? Why are we?
Well, because they're probably the largest singular religious order in the world. The Franciscans there are a lot of different types of Franciscans, where the Jesuits are the Jesuits. And they have infiltrated so many of the universities on, you know, that you wouldn't even think were Catholic universities, supposedly Catholic universities. They were started by the Jesuits. I mean, education in the United States was started by the Catholic Church, formal education. And a big part of that had to do with the Jesuits. So it's part of this foundation. And unfortunately, you know, it has grown into something that is, you know, definitely not traditional, you know, dogma and doctrinally based.
David, so why are we stuck with them? Like, you know, why do they get away with so much? Why do you think? They have a huge social media presence as well, I've noticed of late. Why do you think that nobody, you know, in particular, I'm thinking of Brian Massengale and James Martin, you know, why does nobody step in?
Yeah, there's in the Catholic Church, you have certain protected classes of people who, and you know, so all these people, they always have a certain particular ideology, right? It's this club they belong to. You know, these are the people who, you know, they go on vacation, they have vacation houses in Florida. It's a whole gay mafia, right? And so this is a protected class of people in the Catholic Church who even good bishops in the Catholic Church, they don't cross the line too far with them. You see a bishop like Strickland, he may say something about James Martin, but there's only so far even he could push that line, because this is a protected class of people in the Catholic Church. They have a lot of influence, a lot of money. They own a lot of assets. They know where the bodies are buried. They can expose a lot of people if they start being vindictive about this whole thing. In addition to that, you know, I think I agree with Mary Jo for to a degree, right? I don't think we'll have a pope, especially France is never going to suppress the Jesuits. I don't know if we will see that again. I don't know, right? Hopefully we would. But I think what's more likely to happen is I think the Jesuits eventually self-implode because their seminaries are just gay bathhouses. That's all they are. There's a bunch of gay bathhouses.
Indeed.
They actively recruit homosexuals into the Catholic Church. And so eventually God is going to have enough of that. And I think that's going to be one of the scandals that you're going to see happen in the Catholic Church. There's going to be a real exposure of these Jesuits and exactly who they are and the type of organization they're running. And, because God brings everything that's in the dark, God brings the light. And that's, I think, one of the next things that we'll see in the future. Same thing happened to the sex abuse scandal. We're going to see some real truth come to light with these Jesuits.
Talking about that club, that protected order, something that's really interested me about you is your involvement in Freemasonry. So can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah. Before, like you said, I was a Catholic convert. I converted in 2006. So who was I before that, right? And so I was in church growing up. I came from a very Protestant family. My family was so Protestant. Everyone belonged to a different Protestant denomination, right? So I really didn't, even though my family, everyone went to church on Sundays. Oftentimes I would go with my grandmother. I liked her church. It was the AME Church, African Methodist Episcopal Church. It was more subdued. It wasn't everybody jumping around and yelling like my mother. Sometimes she went to the Baptist church. It's just, So I did go. I like going to church with my grandmother. And but I was never really church. Jesus was never articulated to me. The Bible was never explained to me. So by the time I got to college, I really didn't know, but I had really become anti-Christian is what I was. And I had got caught up into the movement in the 80s and early 90s, like the Pan-African movement. And I became a real victim. I used to be one of those people who think everything bad happens to Black people is because of white people. And so I got caught up in that whole thing. And it's still, it's still around today. You have a lot of Black people like that. The whole Black Lives movement is built on that whole thing. That the whole idea of Black people are victims. And so I started looking at different things, other religions, and eventually a lot of guys in college were joining a fraternity, and I did join the fraternity eventually. But the first thing that attracted me was the Freemasons. I found out I could be a Freemason in college. And my father had been a Freemason, my stepfather, my grandfather, I knew they were Freemasons. So I thought it was something I'd do eventually, but I didn't know I could be like 20 years old and become a Freemason. So when I got that opportunity, I jumped on it and it became my life for 10 years. I mean, I immersed myself deep into Freemasonry, pursued all the degrees that were available, Scottish Rite, York Rite, Eastern Stars, so many different other things. And people started taking notice of me. I got Grand Lodge appointments, and then I started writing books. I started giving lectures and started traveling around the world. So I got a lot of notice and a lot of opportunities with the Freemasons. And I would probably still be a Freemason today if I never became a Catholic. Because as a Protestant, you can interpret the Bible any way you want to. There's nothing in there explicitly that says you can't be a Freemason. But by becoming a Catholic and the Catholic Church is teaching that you cannot be a Catholic and a Freemason, that made it a real easy choice for me, because the Catholic Church was saying if I live my life as a faithful Catholic, I could become a saint. But if I live my life as a Freemason, Freemasons were just proposing, you can become a better man. So the choice is easy. And I haven't looked back, but since the time I become a Catholic, more and more over the years, I've started to figure out ways to articulate, because I didn't know so many Catholics are Freemasons. I never knew that. But the more I began to see that, I've been trying to figure out how to proclaim the truth of what the Catholic Church teaches and to evangelize the Freemasons that you can't straddle fence, you can't be both.
Right.
But why can you not be both? I mean, you did touch on that, and you didn't get into much detail about it. We're sitting here thinking that if you speak, you die. That's what we're sitting here thinking. And then I see your book, The Catholic Church on the Catechism of the Catholic Church on Freemasonry. And so you give us a little bit of insight, but you don't really get to that point where you tell us this is actually what Freemasonry is, So we're still sitting here in the dark, we're clueless.
Yeah. As far as what Freemasonry is, I do spend about maybe 3 chapters in my catechism on Freemasonry talking about that. Well, Freemasonry is a religion. I mean, it is. It's a religion, and that's really, in Pope Clement the 12th, he touched on this. He didn't say it explicitly as that it is a religion. What he uses that teaches probity, that it's indifferentism, that it's teaching an alternative religion. But what he could have said more clearly, that Freemasonry is a religion. So you can no more be a Freemason and a Catholic than you be a Catholic and a Muslim, or a Catholic and a Mormon. All right. So that's the first reason. It's a religion. Freemasons won't call it that. Right? They'll say it's a fraternity or whatever, but they have a God, they have a moral law, they have sacraments that they call degrees, but they're really sacraments. And so they have a whole system of religion there, right? And that's what it is. So you can't be both. That's one of, I think, the most basic reason. What else did Pope Clement say? There were some political reasons, right, because of what was going on at that time. But the other thing, that's what he's talking about, meeting in secret. That was really a political thing. That was the issue with the Freemasons back then. But it's really the probity, the indifferentism, and Pope Leo the Fifth, he would add on to that Freemasonry teaches humanism. So he saw Freemasonry as teaching humanism, that, and Pope Clement the 12th, he really didn't get to this, but he would have. But Leo saw that, because Leo, I think he had a lot of exposure to Freemasonry when he was young, when he was a boy. He may have been initiated as a youth, right? Maybe into the first degree of Freemasonry. There was some evidence there. And so he has some exposure to Freemasonry. And so he has some exposure to Freemasonry, and so he said, yeah, Freemasonry is practicing humanism. And what he's saying by that is that Freemasonry was, what it was offering, what it's proposing, was that it's proposing this idea that you could be this better person, that if you just apply the working tools, because Freemasonry had these working tools, right? It has the square, the compass, the gavel, whatever. And operative Mason, they could take that gavel, right? And if they're building a building, they'll take that gavel and they'll break off some stones of a building. But you're taught as a Freemason to take that same gavel and apply it to your life. So what are those rough stones of your life that you can break off to make yourself a nice square stone? Or they take the gavel and they say, okay, the gavel let's say a measuring gauge for a mason, or operative mason, Freemason, free stone mason. They would use a measuring rod to measure and lay their work, right? Mm-hmm. Its dimensions, its height. But as a Freemason, you're taught to take that same tool and divide it into 3 equal parts: 8 hours for rest, 8 hours for labor, 8 hours for work, right? And that's what Freemasonry is posing. Take these working tools, apply them to your life, and be a better person. And Pope Leo, he saw that, oh, that's humanism, because there's no grace there. There's no God there. There's no Jesus. They're saying you could it's Pelagianism. You can be this better person just by using tools of nature, just human things. And he saw that Freemasonry and Catholicism were incompatible for this reason, because there's no Jesus Christ, there was no grace. And so I would say those are the 3 main reasons that we draw from Pope Leo V and Pope Clement XII as to why Catholics should not be Freemasons. In my book, I really, ever since I started talking about this back in 2010, I always avoid, as much as I can, the scandals and the intrigues and things like that. The French Revolution. Those are interesting things. I talked about them a little bit, but that's not why you can't be a Freemason. The fact that Freemasons were involved in American Revolution, French Revolution, and all this stuff, interesting, dangerous. We should know about that, but that's not why you can't be a Freemason, right? It has to do with, it's an alternate religion, it's indifferentism, and it's humanism. That's what the popes have said.
So how do you overcome what is going on? How do you just ignore all the chaos? Kim touched on it earlier on, all this chaos that is creating so much confusion for the faithful. I mean, we find people are leaving the church because we don't know which way to go anymore. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, do we just go to mass and stay blind? Or, I mean, you've got we've got the TLM, we've got the in our space, you've got people at each other's throats. How do we stay actually indifferent to the confusion?
Yeah, I think, obviously there's a Catholic faithful like you all, obviously. And Pope Benedict the 16th, he talked about this, but the Catholic Church is going to get smaller, right? There's going to be a faithful few. It's going to be a small remnant that's going to remain. And I think we're going to see that more and more. The Catholic Church gets persecuted. It's already happening in other parts of the world. I think you're going to see it more and more here. Perhaps this person who we're calling the Catholic president, he may bring a lot of it if he doesn't convert, right? It's going to be a lot of persecution that's going to come. And becoming a Catholic won't be as easy anymore, right? I don't know what you're seeing in South Africa or other parts of the world there, but we're starting to see it more and more here, that this isn't as easy as it used to be. There's consequences to being a Catholic now, a faithful Catholic. We're seeing the persecution from our bishops. We're seeing the Judases emerge, and we're just in that hour of the church. We're just in the hour of the church. The Catholic Church is the body of Christ. And as a body of Christ, the church has to imitate, has to live the life. She also has to go through her own passion, just as Christ did. And when you see the trajectory throughout the last 2,000 years, you see the church imitate the life of Jesus Christ. You saw this explosive growth of the Catholic Church. You saw this evangelization. You saw this teaching. You saw the Catholic Church went through a period where there's a lot of miracles, a lot of healings, right? But as we get closer and closer and closer to Calvary, to the moment, we're starting to see the persecution more and more. We're starting to see the Judases. Okay, that's just the age that we're in. Just the age that we're in. And so what comes next? Right? The torture, the trial, the persecution, right? And so our duty is just to remain faithful to operate in our mission, the calling that God's given us. We've been called to one of two things or three things, right? Either called to be priests, called to be married or religious life, or called to be celibate singles. Those are three things. And so operate in that ministry that we've been called to, and do everything that we can in our ministry to keep the faithful strong.
MJ, your audio, MJ. Sorry, I'm gonna have to cut this plot out.
Okay, I think that you find that in a lot of countries, and I think South Africa is one of those places where you don't have the variety like we have in the United States, or the choices to go to a traditional mass or to participate in that way. And because of what I call what you were just explaining as far as humanism, I think it's secular humanism has infiltrated the church so much that and in the words of Vatican II, really, to draw more to the faith, which it had the opposite reaction, unfortunately. But I think you're right. The number of within the Catholic religion, as we know it or as we profess it, is going to be really the new beginnings of the faith. And unfortunately, people, I think, are going to be more confused than ever.
Yeah, I think that's going to have to happen, or I think that's inevitable fruit, or inevitable consequence as the church shrinks, right? The faithful shrinks. That means that we're living in a world that consists of more darkness, right? Because if we're smaller, it means there's less light in the world for us to spread in the sense of evangelization, getting out and proclaiming the truth. It means the world has inevitably gotten darker if we're fewer. So, and that's sad. That's unfortunate.
It really is. I mean, the one thing that, and I would like to know what you think about this, is that I noticed that since we had the shutdown lockdown starting last March, and then the churches slowly opened up again in June. That at least in most places, I mean, there's a lot of places like California where they're not open at all. But we all thought that, well, the church coffers were going to diminish, but they haven't because of the money they got through the government, a lot of the large archdioceses. So do you think, as this is what I'm thinking, but do you think that there are going to be fewer churches because they're going to consolidate? Your local parishes are going to disappear.
Yeah. You see a lot more of that. I mean, there's a couple things that's affecting that. Obviously, fewer faithful, fewer baptisms, fewer marriages, but also fewer priests. All right. And so you see a lot of dioceses here in Illinois. I'm not in Chicago, but I'm in Southwest Illinois. You don't see a whole lot of it next to me in St. Louis. But up in Chicago, Supich is just, he's just making these mega churches, right? Up in Michigan, up in Detroit, also, a lot of consolidation. The culturally, what they call the culturally Black Catholic churches, culturally Black Catholic churches are churches that are predominantly Black, they go back to, the 1800s. But those are consolidating everywhere, just because attrition, right? And so fewer parishes. I think that's we're seeing that now. I think probably gonna see a lot more of that.
But don't you see that as where it's going to be harder and harder for the faithful to want to make that trip to church if they've got to travel 20 miles to church?
What
at
amazes
least in
me,
the United States.
What amazes me though is that a lot of people who prefer the traditional Latin Mass, they'll drive far.
Yeah.
I do. We have one in this. I live in the Diocese of Wilmington, Delaware. Guess who that diocese is? That's Mr. B's diocese.
Okay.
Yes, and he is. Anyway, the thing is, I travel 20 miles.
Yeah, you guys are road warriors.
And let me tell you, the sharp divide, I was on James Martin's page the other day, and he posted something. I don't know which diocese it was, but the bishop had lifted the dispensation for Sunday Mass. And his followers were, and he said, I can't remember his words, Mel, maybe you remember. He said, follow your conscience, James Martin.
It was something like that.
He said that even though the obligation is back for Sunday Mass, you should follow your conscience. And the comments there were like, being an administrator on our group of traditional Catholics who, like you say, will travel miles and miles just to get to Mass. And James Martin's followers who were basically saying, we're fine with online Mass. We're cool. We'll stick with that. I think that in the last 2 years, the divide has become so clear cut. You're either here or you're there. But yeah,
that is really scary. I mean, it's like mission accomplished. Mission accomplished. I mean, if you wanted to use this whole coronavirus as a way to have a reset in the Catholic Church as well, to proclaim a new truth, right? Mission accomplished. I mean, you just turned everybody Protestant. They think they don't have to go to church. They don't think there's no obligation. I mean, that everybody just Protestant now, and that's mission accomplished. That's amazing.
Yeah, it's crazy.
It is, and it's being funded. It's being funded by the globalist, agenda.
Yeah.
And that's and so we don't, our tithing to our parish is not as important anymore.
Yeah, you touched on that too, Mary Jo. They don't. Yeah, you said we thought they were going to miss the money. Yeah, they have other sources of money. These people have deep money. I mean, they'll sell a building to pay off a sex abuse scandal. I mean, they have money. They have plenty of money. Who was it? Worrell used to carry money around in his pocket, just hand it out to people. They don't need our money. They have deep wells in other places.
I know. I kind of see these large modern churches, and there's nobody in them.
We were already that's the amazing thing about the whole COVID thing, about, this whole thing, hey, you got to sit 2 pews apart or whatever. All these churches have space already. That was no big deal. We were doing COVID before COVID came, right? all these churches were empty anyway.
That's true.
Absolutely.
So David, do you prefer, well, are you a TLM or an NL goer?
My preference is the Eastern rites, the divine liturgy. So I tend to, when I can, I would like to be at the Byzantine
Yes.
Catholic
lovely.
liturgy. That's my preference. I never fully became a member of that church for a few reasons, right? I mean, one, when I did have an opportunity, when I used to live in Northeast Ohio, we had a lot of different Eastern Rite churches there. I didn't really, at that time, I didn't find community there like I did in my Dominican parish with the Dominican fathers. We had a very Orthodox Novus Ordo there with no altar girls or anything like that, just kneeling at the rail. So I had a traditional community there. And so in a community there, but my heart, as far as liturgy goes, is the divine liturgy of Saint John, I'm the theologian, Saint Gregory, a theologian. But here in St. Louis, sometimes my wife and I, sometimes we'll go over to St. Louis for traditional Latin Mass. Sometimes we might go to the Byzantine, but most of the time we have to go on base to our parish on base, at Scott Air Force Base, just because it's not, as you know, in the military, people are coming and going, coming and going, coming and going. And so we do a lot of help there. I'm always the RCI teacher, and we do other things there. So it's a community that needs us. And so that's where we are. That's not, liturgically, that's not where our heart is, but that's where we have to be for the community.
But how do you find time for all of this? I mean, now you've just mentioned that you're an RCIA teacher, and I mean, needless to say, the whole world is lacking catechesis, but how do you actually find time for all of this? You're a busy man.
Yeah, I don't know. I never really thought about it. I guess I just make time.
Happens.
I mean, there's a lot of things. I mean, I wish I had a life as far as, that. I mean, I wish I would able, I mean, I wish, sometimes you do wish your life was just normal. I wish I could get off work and read a book, play a game of chess, sit back and drink bourbon, find something, there was a time in my life when I used to have hobbies, things I like to do, but everything gets work now. It's just work and ministry. And so, but how long do we have to live, right? So got to do the work now.
I just want to get this question in quickly because we get it a lot on the group. Now let me get my thoughts together. Right. So, I mean, obviously, David, you're familiar with the term doublethink.
Doublethink.
Yes.
Is that like duplicity, hypocrisy? No,
it's like holding two complete opposite facts to be true when they cannot be true at the same time.
Okay.
So the church teaches that abortion is a grave sin, but the Vatican has now stated that the vaccine for COVID is morally acceptable. So, it kind of boggles the mind a bit. And how do we reconcile this now? Because it's like they're teaching us two complete opposites. What do we do with that?
Yeah, I think the basic thing is just moral theology, Catholic moral theology. It looks at the moral act itself. It doesn't get into the means. It doesn't get into the ends. It doesn't. Those things are have to do with culpability and things like that, mitigating factors. We could think about those, but as far as the morality of a thing, it's the act itself. Okay, and so the act. What is the act itself here? Is it moral or immoral? Well, if I were to go rob a bank and get money, and I gave each of you some of that money, and you knew where it came from, you would be complicit in that act of theft.
Right.
And so so even though my moral act was theft, you did participate in my immoral act. Right. Okay, so you're participants in it. And so if I have full knowledge of the fact that I'm taking the vaccine and the source of that vaccine somehow was a participation in the immoral act of child murder, proglicide, the killing of an offspring, abortion, as we properly call it, then I'm participating in the act. Now, it came up from headquarters of the Vatican. Well, it's so far remote, right? This word remote. I mean, but here's a remote control, right? And I could turn off this TV right now. So remotes really doesn't have anything to do with whether it's moral or immoral. The distance of the action doesn't matter. If I were to rob a bank and I held that money for 30 years, and then I gave you that money, you would still be participating in that immoral act. So distance and remoteness doesn't matter. And so, so the whole thing that came up from headquarters is just, it's just dumb, to say it bluntly.
That's exactly what it is. So everybody's just a bit confused, but I mean, what you say makes sense. It's just, we're not, understanding why they're putting these statements out.
And it's pretty simple. Our faith, I think a lot of times is made complicated. Don't complicate my faith. Keep it simple, and it's right. And that's exactly what you just did, David. I mean, you just, if the initial act was immoral, then anyone involved in it along the way is complicit.
Complicit, yes.
Yeah.
It was amazing. I mean, they've, Pope Francis got the vaccine. I think Pope Benedict XVI, poor soul, he's an old guy. I've been scared to take the vaccine. My wife's parents, she told my wife's parents, she said they're taking the vaccine. I said, you really want them to take that? I was like, well, I wouldn't let my mom take it. She's like, well, how would you stop your mom from taking the vaccine? I said, my mom wouldn't take the vaccine. So, but I mean, just because it's so many side effects, I would just be worried. And so, but it's this whole globalism, like I think when you said, I think Mary Jo said, is the whole globalism thing. This, we see headquarters participating in this whole thing.
Yeah, and that's what's worrying.
Well, now they're talking about the president in Washington, if he's in Washington, is said that possibly here in the United States, there won't be any interstate travel. So if you live in Delaware, you're stuck in Delaware. Unless you have the vaccine. And I guess I'll be stuck in Delaware.
That's wow.
It's like almost traveling like it used to be before the EU, where you had to have a passport to go from country to country.
Oh, yeah.
And the passport is your vaccination certificate.
Vaccine passport, that's right.
Well, I better get my traveling clothes on and climb every mountains because
you're not getting the vaccine.
I want to see a few places before I go up to the big guy.
Yeah. Man.
Okay. I don't want to take up too much more of your time, but I do have one last question. Pope Francis, he recently stated that those who don't agree with everything that pertains to Vatican II don't stand with the church. And a lot of people are feeling very separated now, sort of disconnected from the Vatican, from the Pope himself. Do you have any advice for those people?
Yeah, so the first part of the question was Pope Francis. Say it again for me.
Pope Francis, he stated that those who do not agree with everything that pertains to Vatican II do not stand with the church.
Yeah. I didn't read that article. I think I read the headline, and
But that was basically all he said. There wasn't much more to it. Just basically that, you know, if you're against Vatican II, then you're against the church. You're not with the church. So a lot of us are feeling like, well, we're not with the church, you know.
You think that was you think he was in, it's hard to know what he was saying, but you think he was including in that the post-conciliar documents of Vatican II, like in regards to the liturgy and things like that? Or was it just,
again, yeah,
I think it was just a blanket statement. It was really just quite a blanket statement. And you know, I looked at it as, okay, we understand he was speaking to a group of seminarians or whatever the case may be. But I mean, geez, for goodness sake, we've got people like James Martin that are against every single council. So does that exclude people like him? Does Frankie know what he is saying?
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, I mean, and we sit here and we basically feeling the pressure on ourselves because there is quite a bit of Vatican II that many of us don't agree with. But I mean, firstly, we know it wasn't a dogmatic council. So at the end of it all, we disagree with the fact that it is the teaching authority because they said it wasn't.
All right.
And yet again, we are still saying that it's not actually a disagreement. We are agreeing with what you've said. You told us it wasn't a teaching council. So at the end of it all, we are in agreement. But what about people like James Martin, Brian Messinger? I mean, we've got millions of these priests here in South Africa, my goodness. I mean, if you guys had to see what our faith looks like in this country, it's quite a joke.
So I gotta have you on my podcast so you can tell us more about that.
Amen.
It is really quite a joke. So yeah, I don't know if Pope Francis knows what he's saying.
Yeah. I do know that within the Catholic Church, because I have a lot of seminarian friends like you ladies may as well. That Father, I'm using my podcast not too long ago from Grace Force.
Father Highland.
Father Highland, yeah. So he's on my podcast a little while ago. So he's in the 80s, right? Well, he's in the seminary. He had to talk about, he was up in Mundelein, Chicago. And Gregory, he was a teacher there at the time. And so he's talking about how at that point, that back then, if you were kind of conservative or kind of more traditional, you just kind of, you couldn't really let many people know. You kind of had to keep that to yourself. But if you were like a flaming homosexual, everybody can know because you had your own wing, right? Yeah. And so even today, this young seminarians who are inclined to tradition, they can't, they kind of have to keep that a little bit to themselves. But what's going on inside the church is there's this real tension with a lot of these new seminarians coming up who are very traditional. And so the old guard, that Francis represents, the liberal wing, they want to hold fast onto the work that they've begun, right? Mm-hmm. And they don't want any disruption of what they would think is going backwards from Vatican II. But they see this young crop of seminarians coming up that they view as a threat that wants to take the church back. And so you see a lot of that going on. So that's why sometimes I think maybe that's what Pope Francis was just kind of, putting out there too, another shot in that arrow of saying we're not going backwards.
Indeed. Okay. MJ, Mel, yes. Any more questions for David?
Yes. Ash Wednesday has actually begun for us today. It's almost 3:30 a.m. here in South Africa.
And us, yes.
Yeah, and you, Kim, hey?
Yes.
So as we enter Lent, what kind of advice can you give us, just to carry us through this journey, to grow from it and to learn?
Yeah. So you said it's 3 a.m. where you're right now.
Yeah.
See, I can see it on Kim's face, but Melissa, I don't see it so much on yours.
I
It's
had 2
only
hours
2:30,
David.
you know, here. Mel's even worse. She's 3:30.
Okay.
I had 2 hours sleep.
It's
All
only
right.
it's only 8:25 here.
Yeah. So wow, it's a Lent there. So yeah. Lent is, a lot of people say, hey, let's give up something for Lent. But Lent is really about, prayer, fasting, and almsgiving. Prayer, fasting, and almsgiving. And so those are concepts of really doing more, right? Of doing less. Sometimes we think of it as less, because we think of fasting as giving up something, but fasting is really a sacrifice. So it's giving more. And so I think, as we get deeper and deeper into Lent, the idea of prayer, fasting, and all giving and doing more, we should think about that. For me doing more this Lent is I try to do the divine office as often as I can in the morning, pray the divine office. So I really need to make a commitment to every day this Lent pray the divine office. So that's my commitment of doing more in that sense. And I do need to give more money at my parish, because since they don't take cash anymore, I need to get out and say, I don't have cash, but I do need to go onto the website and give more money. I give money because I usually give cash, but it's cashless society now. It's like, so I need to make a commitment of doing more with alms giving as well. So those are my commitments. And what are you guys doing?
Oh, don't even ask. Mel and I, we're still deciding a couple of hours ago.
Well, I know what I decided to do.
Tell us.
What are you doing, MJ?
Well, I have a chronic disease and it causes me 24/7 pain. And one of the things that I have done that I have made a commitment to was that every time that I even think of the pain, that I say the prayer, the glory be, to at least 24 times a day. And that was a novena of Saint Therese of Lisieux. Mm-hmm. And I really, and I know that people have far worse problems than I do. So, but to connect those two will put me in almost constant prayer every hour. And it's just a little thing, but it's a habit. Mm-hmm. But more than a habit, it's a covenant that I want to make with our Lord. So that's what I'm doing this Lent.
Yeah, that's a beautiful thing. Yeah, I see. Yeah, that's relationship.
That is. Melanie, I'm going to get back to you.
You're going to what?
I'm going to Mass at 10 a.m. And I'm going to get sprinkled, apparently.
Yes.
What is this sprinkle thing that's going on?
But you know what? It's not that bad because they sprinkle here all the time. I mean, that's the done thing in Italy.
But I wear a hat.
Don't get the cross.
I wear a hat.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I'm South African and I'm used to having the cross on my head, but here in Italy, it's always been sprinkled. So
it's always been sprinkles.
Always.
It's just in your hair until you wash it out.
Sprinkled, and nobody's up in arms here about it. It's just
that's cool. Thanks for letting me know that. So I'll be Italian tomorrow. Okay.
Because I was a bit confused. I was a little confused. We received a notification from our diocese that actually said that the sprinkling of ashes is not a new act.
Right.
And I was very confused. I was like, where does this come from? And why didn't they tell us about this before? Because, I'm a convert like David. And ever since I've entered the church, I've had the sign of the cross on my forehead. So, they go on to state, this is not a new invention based on COVID-19. So where does it come from? Like, can somebody tell me that?
Well, like I said, I wear a hat. And I don't think it's going to do me any good because it's going to go right on my hat because it's cold here.
What about people with weaves? What about people with weaves? I mean, you're going to get sprinkled and then bam, it's all gone.
And it's crazy because I had this big plan this year, because typically I always get these smudges on my forehead. I see other people get a nice cross. So I was going to take a Sharpie and draw a cross and ask Father, can you just draw within the lines? Yeah, can you color within the lines? And then, but I guess I have to wait for that.
I mean, is this something that is like across the board everywhere? Because the Pope has said that he wants this done, right?
Yes.
Well, I think it comes from the CDF.
It came from what?
From the CDF.
Oh, okay. Because I go to a TLM mass. Actually, it's a diocesan church that half of the masses are, the traditional Latin mass, and the rest are in the Novus Ordo. And
also,
it is
both forms.
Excuse me?
They offer both forms.
Right. But they're the only church in the diocese that offers the extraordinary form. They're the only one. And so that's why I go there. And it was just, I don't think I'm going to get anybody in trouble by saying this, but it was just the last couple of months that the pastor asked us to wear masks.
We better cut that part out of here. I mean, you can't be saying things like that.
No, but we do wear masks, and but we still everybody receives on the tongue at the altar rail. I can't kneel, so I stand right in the middle, so I look like I'm somebody special. I don't know why, but it's just easier for the priest. And and we have just altar boys, and it's like it was when I was growing up.
Now, Father Altman said that he will be doing the sign of the cross tomorrow.
Awesome.
He in his last homily. So
awesome.
I don't know how far you two are from him, but you could still use your Sharpie and go that side.
Yeah. And maybe worth it. I don't know.
So David, just a final actual question from me. If we look at the validity of SSPX, for instance, but all this controversy surrounding the SSPX, but in our country, actually, we have, I'd say, under 10 SSPX parishes in the entire country, and they are basically, we do have one, I think there's an oratory each in 2 provinces that will offer the traditional form of the Mass. And these oratories are normal Novus Ordo. So it's only actually SSPX that will offer the traditional Mass permanently. They do not do anything else. Now, I've asked this question a million times, and I'm going to ask it one more time, hoping to actually get an answer. Can I actually attend the SSPX parish?
I mean, they're not, the SXPS, they're not, I know there are some issues, right, as far as with headquarters, but the issues are being worked through, right? I don't think we've gotten to a point, we haven't seen anything come out the church that has forbade Catholics from receiving the sacraments there, but there are some concerns, obviously, about some of their ordinations. So in lieu of the church not saying that you cannot receive any of the sacraments there, because the church have said that at times, we can't go to Protestant weddings and things like that. We can't receive communion in Protestant churches. We can in Orthodox churches because their sacraments are valid. And so there's some questions about the validity of some ordinations in the SXPX, but the church hasn't taken the same position in saying that their sacraments are invalid, right? I haven't seen anything like that. So in lieu of that,
exactly. But aren't some of them Melissa, aren't some of them the FSSP, which is totally in line with? None of them. Okay.
And
Because
that's
we
what I
have,
find a bit difficult to understand, because our SSPX parishes are operating under the diocesan bishops anyway. So, I mean, these guys know that these parishes are open. So if there was any question about their canonical status,
Right.
surely they would say something, they would do something.
Right. There's I guess, I really pray for that situation that is resolved and that is worked through, because the longer these, as long as it isn't resolved, we'll keep seeing these paths get wider and wider and wider, and that's what we don't want to happen. We don't want a situation what happened with the Church of England back in the day. Where we had two churches continue. It could have been something could have been done. Something could have been resolved very early on to bring that church back into the fold. And so I guess that's what we don't want to happen. So I really pray for that. Really pray for that situation.
Sorry, guys.
David, how many kids do you have?
I have 4 daughters.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, three of them are in their 20s. But one of them is just the baby. She's gonna be 13 this year. So, but yeah, they're doing good now.
In South Africa, we call that a lot lamaki.
A lot, Lamaki.
A lot, Lamaki.
Yeah, that's
It's
basically
nice
the
way
one
you
that
say
came
it.
long after the others.
Oh yeah.
well, my
So-
father was the father of 5 daughters. So yes, and no sons. And he was spoiled rotten. So you must be spoiled.
They do. Even my dog is a girl. So.
Oh, wow.
You're definitely outnumbered.
Yeah. They all get their way. But
Isn't it
fine.
amazing? Because we see a lot of these effeminate men that will say, "Oh, I was raised by a single mom and I only had females around me, and this is what happened." And yeah, we have actual men.
I don't believe it's environment. I believe it's
I also
hormonal.
don't believe this.
Probably.
So yeah.
Yeah. That's funny.
Okay, so are we going to end now, ladies, and gent, because I'm going to fall asleep at the wheel here. David, thank you very much. We really
Thanks for having me
Thank
on
you.
this
It's
first
such a
inaugural
pleasure.
episode of Talking of Caritas and Veritate. And it's been such a pleasure.
Thank you. You've made us feel at
Thank you,
ease because
David.
we were super nervous. Well, I was
Yeah.
at least, but
Keep it going. I look forward to like I said, I gotta have you guys on my show to get you some more subs and to share your work.
thank you. We hope to
thank
have you
you.
again. Eh?
Thank
All right.
you.
Next time it'll be 3 a.m. my time. So
Hey,
Well,
there.
you have a blessed Lent.
all right. Bye.
Thanks,
Thank
David.
you,
Bye.
David.
Thank you.
Bye.